So welcome back to Fish's Call Sheet. Today we have one of the all-time legends in television. Shows like The Cosby Show, A Different World, Davis Rules, Grace Under Fire, Sybil, Third Rock from the Sun, That 70s Show, but most pressingly from my life, Roseanne. We have one of the most incredible executive producers that I've ever known, someone who's built a true empire. Tom Werner, welcome.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
How old were you when I first met you?
Probably 6, I think.
Okay.
Actually, on that note, do you remember the first time meeting me?
If you give me, I kind of remember because I was like charmed by you from the very beginning. I thought you had charisma, but what do you remember about it?
I remember coming into the offices.
Yeah.
I was a little different than everybody else who auditioned because everybody else was like really a Hollywood person. And for me, it was more about the experience. Uh-huh. And I remember coming in the office and meeting you. And I remember just like when you shook my hand, it felt like formal but welcoming, if that makes any sense, as a kid.
Yeah.
But I've always kind of looked at you as this person who, from a business standpoint, is incredibly it was mind blowing. I've looked up to you. I watched you work literally for 40 years.
Well, I appreciate that. But, when I was thinking about, what I was going to convey to you, I think that one of the things that has helped me in my career is that when I meet somebody and my goal is to cast them in something, I really want to avoid the sort of the show business Hollywood, somebody whose mother has trained them to come in and shake. Don't forget to shake his hand, and what I want is just to convey on screen an authentic personality. When you think about your character on Roseanne, there was a lot of Michael Fishman there, and it was very honest. And it wasn't sort of like, an actor coming in. And think about how unusual it was that Sarah Gilbert was playing, your sister, and Lacey Goranson was playing your sister, because these are people who are not sort of in that cookie cutter way that you see most actors. And I remember on the Cosby Show when we were casting the Huxtable children, that often an actor would come, someone reading for a role would come in and they'd, say, "Hey, how you doing?" And then Bill would stop them and say, "Is that how you talk to your father?" And he said, "No." "Well, how do you talk to your father?" He said, "Hey, how are you doing, sir?" Because there's a certain respect you have. He says, "Well, why are you not saying that when you're reading these lines? Why are you pretending to be sort of, somebody you're not?" So what was great about you was that you were just being yourself. And I don't even know if you had any acting training, but, it didn't really matter.
Well, I think for me, I think that's kind of the secret of my life and my career is taking the training portion of it and being authentically me in the midst of it. Because I think people can feel when it's not.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you've just said it better than me.
Well, I have questions. Can I go all the way back to the beginning of your career?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What was your first job in entertainment?
I was making documentaries when I was in college. And I made a documentary about Robert Flaherty, who actually was the very first documentary filmmaker ever. He went up to northern Canada and lived with Eskimos. He made this documentary called Nanook of the North. It's now probably over 100 years old. Just lived with Eskimos. And imagine in those days, it was mostly silent movies, right? I don't even know if there was sound. And he would shoot during the day, and he had the ability to process the footage in these igloos at night. And then he would get these Eskimos to come and watch the footage that he'd made during the day. And he told some story about how there was the scene of Nanook spearing a walrus, and they were all watching it he had a projector and he was showing them the footage, and they all ran up to the front of the igloo to help Nanook spear the walrus. So they just didn't understand the whole idea of filmmaking. So I made a film about Shirley Chisholm, who she's probably not in everybody's lexicon in terms of important politicians, but she was the first Black woman to run for president. And she ran in 1968. And she actually ran a very serious campaign. It wasn't a showbiz campaign. She really was trying to get delegates. It was a very interesting campaign. She had a harder time getting votes because she was a woman than that she was an African American. There's a stamp made for Shirley Chisholm. She's considered one of the, in Black history in this country, she's an important figure. And I lived with her for about 6 months during her campaign. Anyway, so I was making a lot of documentaries. They were on PBS. And I was finding I was spending more time raising money to make them and trying to get them distributed than actually the making of them. So it wasn't as much fun, the front end or the back end. And I was offered 2 jobs. One job was to be a producer at a show that was just getting off the ground called 60 Minutes. And I said, well, this isn't going to last very long. So I think, and the other job was to work at the ABC network. It was in the research department, but the research department is a very important department because it analyzes the ratings, but it actually helps the salespeople in terms of generating data so that they can go out and sell advertising. And I found myself sort of fascinated because ABC at the time was the number 3 network. There were only 3 networks. Fox wasn't even in existence. Mm-hmm. And it was doing very poorly. And there was a line that because the Vietnam War was going on, and the line was, if they put the Vietnam War on the ABC network, it would be canceled in 13 weeks. Because everything that we were doing was very unsuccessful. And I was just young enough and impudent enough to say, if I could ever get into programming, I think I could help come up with programs that actually could be much more popular in a both commercial and artistic way.
Now, I heard a story, and you tell me if this is wrong, but I heard you met Marcy Carsey, who obviously you guys created Carsey-Werner. And I heard that she did an interview with you and kind of met with you, and you told her what she didn't want to hear.
That's true.
That you were bold and that you told her the things that were true. And that was kind of the thing that made her really like working with you and really respect your opinion.
Yeah, well, she was, I think, forced to meet with me. There was a man who was her boss, whose name was Michael Eisner, who has become a legend, obviously, and left ABC and eventually built the Disney empire to what it is today. But she was forced to meet with me, and we would just go over some of the shows on the network. And I would just say, look, I don't know how these shows got to be ordered, let alone scripted. I mean, because you have to go through a lengthy process. The gauntlet is pretty narrow to get a show from idea stage to the network. I said, somebody is actually liking this. It makes no sense to me because the acting isn't good, the writing isn't good, the idea isn't good. Anyway, she was bemused.
Tell me about that part from, you've created an empire from creating groundbreaking shows. So obviously that tone, you knew something. And I think having the vision of the analytics and then understanding the personal portion of it, I think that combination has been incredibly powerful for you, at least from the watching side. Do you agree?
Well, I think there's certain things to embrace and certain things to avoid. I think you should embrace good writing. Mm-hmm. Like we wanted to be in business with Jim Brooks, who had, in my opinion, written some of the, great movies, from Terms of Endearment, Broadcast News, created the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And we wanted to be in business with him. And so Marcy and I went to see him and I think cajoled him into doing another television series. And he wanted to do a show set in a taxi garage, which in my opinion was not exactly the most exciting background for a show. But when he talked about the characters, it became quite exciting. And, in the end, while Judd Hirsch was the center of that show was made great by all the characters that, included Danny DeVito and Tony Danza and Andy Kaufman. And so our thought was support that idea, collaborate with him. And I think right now the relationships between networks and creators are much more adversarial. Mm-hmm. Certainly in my experience, our goal was to be their blocking back and to help get the show on the air. And once it was on the air, to really, one of the things that Marcy and I learned was how to give notes. I think that's a lost art right now. I'm doing a show right now for Netflix, and I have a lot of respect for the executives on the other side, but they give so many line notes and page notes, and I think that I trusted the people that we were collaborating with a little bit more. And so if I had a meeting with Jim Brooks, I try to give him 3 or 4 notes. I wouldn't give him page 3, the 7th line. Can you make that line funnier? So anyway, so there's certain things like, the experience of working at ABC obviously was helpful when Marcy and I left, but okay, so we go to the comedy club. That was what we would spend most evenings doing. And this guy shows up at the comedy club named Robin Williams. And he is clearly, you didn't need to be a genius to say, this person is brilliant.
Yeah.
And so we went to Gary Marshall, introduced Robin to Gary. Our role in it was to support Gary's vision, which was, he is so unique. He can't just be a dad. Can you imagine casting Robin Williams as a dad? That just isn't the best.
No, you'd pin him into chaos because he couldn't do any of his wild stuff.
Right. Well, and you can't really even cast him as like, hey, let's have him be the head of an advertising agency. So the only thing that he could be brilliant in and take full use of his talents would be if he was an alien or something like that. And that was genius on the part of Gary's part, because really what Robin is doing is he's commenting on the world from a unique perspective. So he is the perfect fish out of water. And that show was very difficult to get on the air. Marcy and I made, with Gary, a presentation and showed it to the programming board. And nobody at ABC liked the presentation. And it was off the schedule until the very last minute.
For that part of the process, what do you think the magic is? You've had so many great shows make it on air. What would be the advice you'd give to somebody trying to sell shows and create connections with networks?
Well, again, first of all, it's working. It's all mercury. And I'm fairly humble about I've made some shows that have not worked. To take Roseanne, for example. Now, here we had a show in the Cosby Show, which is very hard to get on the air, by the way. ABC passed on it. ABC, our alma mater. Now, here we are. We had helped build the network up so that we were number one. ABC, our alma mater, is going to be the first network we pitched the Cosby Show to, and they pass. Okay, and now, months later, the show becomes one of the most popular shows in the history of television. In its 8-year run, I think it was the number one show for 5 of the 8 years, and 60, 70 million people were watching it every Thursday. So now, for the first few years, Marcy and I are being pitched a lot of good ideas. And we say, you know what? We have to keep our eye on the Cosby Show, which, by the way, was not easy because we were living in California and the show was being shot in Brooklyn. But I don't know how many times somebody said, strike while the iron is hot. We said, we got to just focus on this, because we're not successful ourselves unless it gets to 100 episodes. And we've all seen shows that were good in its first year. So for us, we wanted to just make sure that the quality of the Cosby Show was as good as it could be. So now we finally have this idea, which is sort of the opposite of the Cosby Show, which is, the Cosby Show is about a family was, fairly well off. And now we thought, well, what about focusing on the life of a working class mom who had really two heavy responsibilities. She had to go to work during the day, and then she had to be a mother to 3 kids. That seemed to us, that's not Claire Huxtable. The thing that was interesting was we had a script written. Lore might be that, Roseanne, was there at the beginning. She wasn't there at the beginning. We had a script written. And the debate that Marcy and I had was like, who can we cast in a very unique way to play this character? And like Valerie Harper was suggested as an idea. We actually could have shot a pilot with Valerie Harper, but we said no. And there was this brilliant stand-up comedian, Roseanne Barr, who had absolutely no acting experience. And we said, well, let's take a shot with this unknown comic. That was a very hard show to get on the air. Now, you would think that NBC now, which had the Cosby Show, would have said, whatever you want. But NBC passed on Roseanne.
It's incredible, right? When you think about ABC passing on Cosby, right, and then NBC passing on Roseanne.
Right. My feeling about sort of even, 40 years later, whatever, is that I don't take any of this personally, because I don't feel like my feelings are hurt. I just, I'm determined to get Roseanne onto the air. And the interesting thing about Roseanne was, just like the Cosby Show is great because of lots of things. The most important, obviously, being Bill Cosby, but it's also great because of all the surrounding cast. We had seen John Goodman in, I hadn't seen it. Karen Mandelbach had seen him in a play. And we thought it was a very, very hard assignment to find Roseanne Connor. Now, when I talk about Roseanne Barr, Roseanne Connor's husband, because he had to, as I wouldn't say her comedy is brittle, but you know what I mean about her comedy is very strong. We needed to soften it, and the way to soften it is to find somebody who would love her, even though she was very strong. And that's that. It's like. I remember, and this was Roseanne's line, give her credit. She said, if my kids are alive at the end of the day, I've done my job.
Right.
Which is such a great line. But we needed a husband who would enjoy that point of view and see her as a strong, mama bear. And I guess my point is, what was the question?
No, I think all of that is so beautiful, because I think people don't have an idea of putting all these things together. You actually mentioned kind of how precarious it is, especially in the old days, because you had to kind of make it to that 100 episode mark before you really officially made it.
Yeah. Right.
And now that's not quite the case, but it's still, I think, true. There's an element of like 100 is you're enough of an established show that you can go into reruns, that
Right.
you've established an audience that really knows you and loves you and is consistent and rides with you. And I think that's longevity.
If we can be complimented about one thing, it's that Marcy and I wanted to continue to be independent because it allowed us to push back against the networks when we thought that they weren't making the right decision. And we became the most successful independent production company. When the network was dealing, it was just they were dealing with Marcy and me. And in the very beginning, the Cosby Show isn't on the air yet, and Brandon Tartikoff, who is the head of the network, is looking at a rough cut and is not very happy about it because there wasn't a lot of story. And he's pushing us to change really the basic story structure of the Cosby Show and wanting it to be much more traditional. And we did this little scheme where we would not be in when he called, and then because of the time change, and then we would pretend to send rough cuts to him, and he said I hadn't received it yet, and then we hadn't really sent the rough cut to him. And then when he'd get it and he'd call us back with notes, we were always at a run through. So the first 6 weeks of that show, before the show went on the air, they had a lot of concerns about the show.
Mm-hmm.
And my point, though, being that it was very helpful to us that we were shooting the show independently and that we were not having to run casting ideas by them. In the end, we did the stories that Bill thought were the right stories.
Now, to that end, it feels like the business is kind of moving back towards there being some independence. As somebody who has been the most successful that I can think of independent producer, do you see that as a trend? Do you have other than what you just mentioned, what are the other key things that you think really give you power by being independent?
Well, I think there are some creative producers that have a lot more independence than normal, but they don't have the independence that we had because Netflix is still paying the bills. We were paying the bills, really. The network was giving us the airtime, and they were giving us not even all the money to produce the show because we were in deficit. We were betting on ourselves, but nobody has the independence. Not even the strongest TV people have the independence that we had. And things changed. In 1992, there was something called the change in the financial syndication rules, where networks were able to own shows that they put on their air, and it was a federal legislation that changed the ball game.
Now, you've navigated that in such a beautiful way. I want to point out that I don't think you get enough credit for, which is how many times you've bet on yourself. It's something that I've tried really hard in my personal and my professional life to really do. It's something that you inspired me because I watched you through the years. I was the small set of eyes sneaking around your offices and listening from a distance and listening to how you ran things. You mentioned Karen Mandelbaugh. Talk about betting on yourself, because you've turned that into an empire.
Well, it's probably not by design. I think it's sort of like anybody who says, hey, listen, I want to become a millionaire. That's not how to become a millionaire. You have to believe in something, and just
right.
The financial rewards were always secondary to me. When we did the Cosby Show, Bill wanted to do a show about a family, but he wanted to be a limousine driver. And Marcy and I said, there's no show on television. There's no show about an African-American family where economics isn't front and center. There was a show called Good Times, and they were very struggling with economics. And there was the Jeffersons, and he'd made it. We just said, we just want to do a story about a family and not have economics be in it. That was radical. Mm-hmm. So I guess my feeling is that we wanted to tell, we wanted to embrace stories that were about something. I mean, what people, when they think about Roseanne, they don't realize how much heart there is in Roseanne.
All
And
right.
that it was never really our intention to sort of have three jokes a page. You know, it was our intention to be part of an ensemble that told stories that were relatable. And even though the Connors were struggling, they turned lemons into lemonade. There was always
Mhm.
something, no matter how much they were up against it. You know, like as you know, because you know the stories as well as I do. You know, take the Halloween episodes. You know, they
Right.
were making joy out of Halloween, and because that's and so I wanted to have Halloween with the Connors, right? So
Right.
I guess my point though is that our independence allowed us to be focused on authenticity and not to sort of, hey, you know, I mean, I remember the number of people said, hey, the reason the Cosby Show is working is because it's about a black family. Let's do another show about a black family. No, that's not why it was working. It was working because Bill Cosby was a comedic force, as was and is Roseanne. So just let's work on projects that are about something that are not on the air. So in some ways, it's somewhat contrarian, and let the audience decide.
What's the best part of being a producer after all these years? What's the thing that still makes you excited?
I think it's the joy of making people laugh. You know, you know, there was nothing more fun than hearing the authentic laughs from 500 people who come to a show. You know, and I mean, we didn't yet talk about that '70s show, but you know, people would just it was great because the writing was so good and the acting was so good, and it was just fun to. I mean, I think it's also fun to watch it on the air, but if I'm watching it on the air many weeks later, I'm alone, and here you're making something, and it was very gratifying to sort of drive home from Studio City on Friday night after a Roseanne show or that '70s show, and just know that you had made something out of thin air that you know was going to be viewed a couple of weeks later by millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that keeps me coming back. It's the thing I never get enough of. I tell people the soundtrack to my life is laughter, but it's the authentic kind because you know any kind of forced laughter, it's different.
Yeah,
And you can just feel it when an audience comes together, has the celebration, when you build a joke and then you hit the crescendo just right and the whole room kind of has that collective release. It's so amazing.
yeah. I mean, if you, I'm sure you've seen it 50 times. The pilot of Roseanne is like the best the best ice cream you've ever had in your life,
Yeah,
right?
I love the fight because there's almost no other time I can think of where people fight and actually it's hilariously funny and they
Yeah,
fight about who's making dinner
right. Yeah,
and the way people can react to that and love that moment.
yeah,
You know, there's truth in all of that, but there's also great humor. And I do think we lose some of that when we try to do a certain number of jokes per page, right?
yeah,
I think the moment is funny.
right. Well, and if you can capture what goes on in a kitchen or what goes on in the living room and it works, it's so great. You know, I mean, I know there's all these fantastic ideas, and I mean fantastic, meaning, you know, larger than life ideas. Nothing to me resonates more than watching a show that takes place around a kitchen table.
I think it's still the moment to me of like, it's the thing you can connect with, right? Because everybody's been around the table and had that experience.
Right.
And then to find the magic in it, I think when you can find magic in the normal everyday,
Right.
you can connect with people in a truly different way.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, after all these years, I'm curious, What is the dream now? What's the thing that still gets you like motivated, or that you have this incredible drive for?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm motivated to continue to do shows. I'm working on a show right now, a little bit like what we try to do with that '70s show, where the people who were the children are now the parents, and we're doing a reboot of A Different World, and it's
Hmm.
really about what's going on at Hillman, which was that fictional college, in 2026. So I'm into that world of college students and what college students are thinking about. And it's a very interesting uh, idea, because HBCUs are very different places than, going to Michigan or going to Purdue. And the acting is great and the stories are great. So I'm excited about that. Um, recently I've worked on two plays that or in the West End. That whole process started with, there was this person, Sarah Snook, who was on Succession, who was playing 25 characters on a stage in the West End a couple of years ago, on a play that was really based on Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray, and I was just blown away by her performance, because it was a multimedia performance and she was playing all these different characters. And I helped bring that to Broadway. And then I developed a couple of other shows that are now in the West End. And again, I'm bringing something to people that I think is smart and unusual and worth their time. And it's very gratifying.
Yeah. I think once you're a builder and a creator, I don't think there's nothing else quite like it.
Mhm.
Can I ask you, you and I have lived through some controversies along the way. I don't want to dive too deep into them, but I would like to know from the executive side, right? I know from the acting and even sometimes from the directing side, but as an executive, what's it like to build something and then have it be so precariously delicate and have things that become controversial, and then you have to try and figure out a way to hold it all together?
Well, it's part of the job, right? I mean, one of the things that is both unique and difficult about television is that it's not a group of people coming together to do one story. You really have to think of this as, certainly we always thought of this as being something where you have to continue to generate stories for 5, 6, 7, or 8 years. And so, you, on the one hand, you've got a haiku, which is only 5 lines, and how do you make that as good as it can be? And the other thing is, you're making 24, 25 different episodes a year. And of course, there's going to be challenges and arguments, but if try to keep for us as executive producers, our goal was just to keep the quality as good as and as high as it could be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful balancing act, right? Trying to run the business side, but trying to really focus on the creative side, which has always been your main draw. And then also understanding that you're dealing with incredibly creative people, but incredibly creative people have strong opinions and strong pushback, and then trying to balance the collective to tell a consistent story along the way.
Right. Well, you're right. It's a balancing act.
Well, you have been, I don't know if people know, I remember growing up and watching you. You were the owner of the Padres. Now you're with Fenway Sports Group. You're a huge sports guy. How do you think the teamwork dynamic, is that a portion that kind of has brought into both your professional and the entertainment world, but also on Fenway Sports?
Well, I think that the reason Fenway Sports Group is successful is it's, again, a collaboration with a lot of very, very talented people. Part of my hope is that these productive people continue to work at Fenway Sports Group. I mean, we have an executive, his name is Sam Kennedy, who's been with us for, I think, 25 years, who could be the commissioner of any number of professional leagues. And he's decided to stay because he believes in our vision. We give him, the authority to make decisions and don't second guess him. We support him, and he's a terrific guy. And what makes something successful. I'm not a great director. I can find a great director. I'm not a great actor. I can find great actors. And what makes these endeavors successful, I think, is that it is a family. It is a collaboration. And so I think the success of the Red Sox, it obviously, on the field, it's important, by the way. People talk about the stars, but in baseball, the star only gets up one time out of 9. Mm-hmm. So you can't dominate the sport the way that a LeBron James can dominate a basketball game. It's a roster of 25 people, and often the most successful team is the one that has the most depth. And the same thing is true, in the front office, is that we have, I think, really strong executives in the minor leagues, really strong executives running baseball operations. And if I learned something from my Padres experience, one of the things was that I came in and I didn't know what I didn't know, but we did not have a strong organization. And I didn't really trust my instincts. I kind of let people sort of do what they did and didn't really get too involved. And it was a very, very frustrating experience because it just wasn't going as smoothly as I'd hoped it would.
Let me ask you this question as we kind of transition back to entertainment, but I do want to ask you this because what was it like to break the curse? What is it like as the owner to have an iconic moment like that?
It was incredible. I mean, people say, well, which is more exciting, to win the first World Series or to do the Cosby Show or this or that. There was something incredible about 2004. And in part, it was the storyline where we were behind the Yankees in the ALCS. Is it ALCS? Anyway, for the pennant. And we could not have imagined, because we'd lost to the Yankees in the 7th game in 2003. We couldn't imagine in the 9th inning of the 4th game, we were down 3-0. All they had to do was win that 4th game, and they were ahead in the 9th inning. And Mariano Rivera, who was one of the great closers of all time, was on the mound. And we were able to actually come back in the 9th inning of that 4th game, win in extra innings, and then we ran into this thing where we were invincible. We won the next game, the next game, the next game. We won the World Series in 4 more games. And when we won the World Series, after the curse, which was 86 years, and in other words, the last time the Red Sox had won before 2004 was 1918. When we won, it was almost as if New England was levitating. I mean, everybody in New England participated in the joy of that, and people were buying Red Sox World Series pennants and putting them on their parents' grave because they hadn't experienced the joy of winning the World Series. So, it was really an extraordinary thing to be part of.
It was kind of healing for a whole area, an area that had almost waited a long time to exhale. And it was, I knew Pedro Martinez early in his career with the Dodgers, and I loved his kind of attitude and he's like, you don't want to see us tomorrow, right? And then Big Papi and all these guys, it just grew, right? And it's the kind of thing that you can't script. Sometimes that's the beauty of sports, is the live experience is something completely different.
Yeah.
Going back to scripted, I worked on the Connors. You gave me my first opportunity to direct, which I found to be just such an incredible experience. I got to do our only real Halloween, which I think was fitting because I got to kind of carry the legacy. Then after I left, we started doing this new thing where you have remastered the old Roseanne. And you put a lot of commitment into that for the audience and for fans and to kind of reach the next generation. What does that mean to you to remaster it and to kind of create it in an almost sharper, more presentable way for the next generation?
Well, I think if you watch shows that aren't remastered, if you look at them, you feel they're dated. So we needed to figure out how to tell the story in such a way that sort of the presentation was as innocuous as possible. I mean, you watch, when people do clips of old television shows, they put it on a small part of the screen because if you can't blow it up and make it feel like it's comparable to something that is being shot now.
Yeah, it was such an honor that you guys brought me back to introduce and kind of present that to the world. And I'm incredibly thankful for that. I feel like that connection with the audience I've built through the years. And I think that you've built a real connection with your audience throughout this. We kind of have the last kind of run of questions that I ask everybody. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you if you could go back to one project, knowing everything you know now, Tom, all the knowledge, all the wisdom. Is there anything you would go back or do slightly different or that you wish you could try again with what you know now?
That's a good question. There were projects that I thought were good ideas that didn't come together for one reason or another. We had acquired the English language rights to this show called Men Behaving Badly. I had seen the British format and really loved the idea of it. It just didn't. We didn't cast it right. So I still think that the idea and the format are good ideas. But, it also, I acknowledge that, it's like, I don't know if Third Rock from the Sun would have worked without John Lithgow. So we were right more than we were not right. But, if I was going to, if I was presented with Men Behaving Badly, I would try to cast it and do a better job than we did.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know. I also think sometimes you're ahead of your timing. I think there's some magic that kind of has to happen where everything lines up correctly. I remember Davis Rules with Jonathan Winters. Jonathan is just a wild man. I had the honor of escorting Robin, who you talked about earlier. I was their getaway driver on the lot to a commissary run that we'll just leave at that one time between them because I knew Robin quite a bit and knew where the studio was.
Right.
And that was such a great group of people. But that show I felt like could have lasted longer, but just didn't. I mean, there are these times where you have a show and you have something, but either the audience doesn't catch it fast enough, especially now with the pressure to be good right out the gate. And then sometimes there's something else in the air. You're ahead of your time and you just don't kind of catch the wave.
Well, that's true. One of the things that was great about the networks when there were only 3 or 4 of them is that I do think the executives were a bit more patient, and testing wasn't quite as important. Seinfeld did not get off to a good start.
No.
And the network was very, very dubious about it working. One thing you definitely need now, even more than ever, is you need an executive on the buy side who is passionate about it, because it's very hard for something to click immediately, and so you need somebody who believes in it.
All right, here's our final run. You ready, Tom?
Yeah.
These are the quick ones.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you look at on a call sheet?
The first thing that whoever called me first.
Okay. What is the last thing you want to see on a call sheet for one of your productions?
I have a pet peeve, which is I really do try to return everybody's call. And
agreed.
I don't differentiate between, Bob Iger or, somebody who's a kid who went to school who's trying to get some advice.
And I can attest to that. You always take my call, no matter what was going on in the world. We've always found a way across geographical divides, across space and time. We've always found a way to connect. Okay, so what do you hate on a call sheet? What's the thing that you're like, no, don't put that on a call sheet. This is going to be a nightmare.
Well, I still read scripts, and what bothers me is I will give almost anybody one shot.
Right.
Like if somebody says, I'm working on a script and I'd like you to read it. And then I find often that it's lazy and that the person who submitted it hadn't done the work on their end, because, nobody can write something in a week that wouldn't be better if they worked on it for 3 more weeks. So what bothers me is when I say no to somebody and then they don't then they say, well, then they call me a second and a third time. Well, why'd you say no? Well, you got your shot,
Okay. What's your favorite thing at craft services?
My favorite thing at craft services. Well, Jen, my wife, wouldn't like it, but I don't mind eating a hot dog.
It doesn't matter how long you go, especially people who love the ballpark. Hot dog every once in a while is a good solid choice. Yeah. All right, what do you hate to see there?
At craft services?
Yeah.
Well, most of it is not healthy. So.
Yeah. I don't want to get you in trouble with Jen. It's not my goal. All right, Tom, how do you define success?
Well, for me, it's not how other people define it. I don't think success has anything to do with economics. It often is like, you get people, well, that movie is successful because it made $1 billion. I mean, success to me is something in the entertainment world, which is something that can live for a while, as opposed to cotton candy or something. I mean, those reality shows that I really don't watch a lot of, like The Bachelor. I mean, I understand why people watch them because it's escapist entertainment. To me, success is doing something that actually has an artistic vision that resonates, you can think about afterwards. The reason that I was so excited about working on High Noon, which is one of the plays with Eric Roth, is that High Noon is about courage and leadership, of which there's very little in politics at the moment. And if people leave the theater thinking about that and going home and saying, that connected with me, that's success.
I agree. Now I always ask everybody, and I think I know, but based on your definition, how are you doing?
How am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm still curious. I'm still excited. I'm sober, so I know it's hard to continue to do good stuff. In sports, it's really hard to win.
Right.
The Liverpool Football Club won the league last year, and everybody predicted that it would do well this year, and we've had some more downs than ups. So I appreciate how hard it is to be successful. I'm grateful that I've had as many successes as I've had.
All right, what's the one thing you want on every set?
Laughter.
Okay. If you could eliminate one thing from a set, what would it be?
If I could eliminate, I would like it if people would just appreciate how hard it is to get to that point and enjoy the ride.
All right. What's the best gift you've gotten from a project?
The best gift?
Yeah.
Well, it's not the tangible gifts. It's not like, I've got 4 World Series rings. It's not the jewelry. It's the joy that I feel that I've had a part in bringing to people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the connection and the experience, right? It's that moment and a job well done, things that live on. How do you want the people who worked with you to remember you?
that I was kind. I think there's various, there's the GE Jack Welch way of running a business where he would actually fire the bottom 10% in a work group, and they know it. And maybe that generated revenue. Maybe that was helped the company's success. I'm not. I'm not. I don't want to be critical of that. That is a way. That is a management style, but I certainly prefer a management style where you feel that you're working with people who are part of your family and that you're supporting them rather than criticizing them.
I think that's beautiful. I would ask you the final thing I ask everyone, which is, what is the legacy you want your loved ones to take from your life, Tom?
Well, I think it's all pretty ephemeral. I mean, when you think about, people take themselves way too seriously, and then like a generation later, people don't even know who you are or what you did. I guess from my own point of view, I'd like to certainly feel like I passed on some good values to people, especially to my children, and that, we are so insignificant, we take ourselves way too seriously. We're here just for a very finite period of time. I'm going to do a Passover later this week, and we're going to talk about, freedom, and we're going to talk about oppression. And the world is a very upside down place. So if part of my legacy is that I was able to, in some small way, be on the positive side, on the plus side, move the world a little bit further in the good way, that would be a great legacy.
I'm going to tell you, in my experience, you've left a lasting legacy of a lot of laughter in people's homes, but also you've left a lot of people feeling seen and heard. You've represented parts of audiences that haven't been represented anywhere else. And I know you mentioned it kind of being counterculture, but I think you mentioned authenticity and integrity. And I think that's a huge part of it. For me, this is a rare opportunity to just tell you thank you. Oh, you took a chance on a kid with no experience who came wild, and I'm still a bit of a feral animal, I think, in some ways. But you helped guide me to be a creative force. And I want you to know that you've inspired me to build things. And I have the same mission, which is I want to put things into the world that do more good and that really help reach people.
Well, you're very eloquent about it, and I'm appreciative that I've given you some support for your dream.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Tom.